Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, uncles and aunties, grandmas and granddads, aunties if you're uncles, uncles if you're aunties. In this day and age, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, before we start, it's the Man Mechanic here. Hello there, guys. Cup of tea time. We've got to have a cup of tea before we start. Right, now what we're going to do today, we are going to sort out the cylinder head. I don't know if you can see this very well, but there's the cylinder head just there. It's a very basic design. Hang on, let's get me cleaning products. And this is from my sponsor, Elbow Grease. Right, cylinder heads. How do we sort cylinder heads out? The way they work is very easy. What they do is you've got two valves in there. You've got an inlet and an exhaust valve. Obviously, it's 4 cylinders, 2 valves per cylinder, 8 valves all in total. I remember doing once a V12 Jaguar, and that was an absolute drama because you had about 950 valves per cylinder. And I remember doing a head gasket on it, and it took me a week. This is when I worked at British Leyland, and it was like an absolute drama. And I would never ever want to do that again. Anyway, cylinder head for Triumph Herald. Very basic design. It works. It's not the most powerful engine in the world, but it works, and it will get you from A to B, and it's quite reliable and very, very easy to work on. Now, the actual valves themselves are what they call like a collet valve, or a poppet valve, sorry. And what they do is, when the camshaft opens, it pushes the valve open, lets in a measured amount of air and fuel, closes the valve, compression comes up, rapid burn. It's not an explosion. Explosion would have blown the whole cylinder to pieces. It's a rapid burn. I hate it when people say it's an explosion. It's not an explosion, it's a rapid burn. And what happens then is the piston then gets forced down the bore, which is what your power stroke. And when it comes back up again, this is, like I say, this is an exhaust valve. So what happens is when the compression comes back up again, it pushes open the exhaust valve just before top dead center and starts to push the exhaust gas out. Okay, so I said that wrong actually. So you get the power stroke. It pushes down the piston. As it gets to the bottom of the cylinder, all the energy is gone. It then starts to open the exhaust valve, and as the piston comes back up again, it pushes all the exhaust gases out of the valve, down the exhaust pipe, out of the air. But don't tell the London Mayor about that, because he gets a little bit upset at the moment with emissions. Okay, now there's another story on that. Emissions in London. Only one person has died in the last 30 years through bad air pollution. So it's an absolute con. That's my little bit of anti-government stance there. It's a complete con. All it is a cash cow. Doesn't harm the atmosphere at all in London. If you really want to change in London, get rid of London Airport and get rid of those aeroplanes. That's the one that's really polluting London. I'm not saying that cars don't, but cars are a lot more efficient than they used to be years ago. Now, my 63 Herald can drive through London because it hasn't got an emissions thing on it because it's too old. So I'm going to go and drive through London, central London, with my choke fully out, going like that. Anyway, that's my view on that one. Anyway, so we've got the exhaust valve. Now we've got also got the inlet valve. Now you notice the inlet valve and exhaust valve are slightly different sizes. The inlet valve, obviously you want to get as much air and fuel in the cylinder as much as you can. The ratio of air to fuel is roughly about 14.7 to 1. That is the ultimate, what they call combustion state. Any more than that and it's too lean, any more air and it's too lean, any more fuel and it's too rich. So roughly round about 14.7 to 1 fuel air ratio to make an internal combustion engine burn correctly. So you always have a slightly bigger exhaust inlet valve than you do exhaust valve. On the exhaust valves themselves, you've got a taper there. See that? And what that does is a measured cut. And when the inlet valve comes back up again, it seats on exactly the same tapered cut on the cylinder head. Now on high performance engines you get like a 3-stage cut, so you get 3 stages to that. On this, just a basic engine, you get just 1 stage, so it's like a 1-stage cut. See that there? There you go. Look at that, eh? Joys of life. So there's a 1-stage cut. Inlet valve, exhaust valve. Very easy, very, very simple. Right, on the top of the cylinder head, you'll notice there is a thing called the combustion chamber top. On some engines, you've got like side valves. This one is what they call an overhead valve. So the valves are overhead of the piston. So the piston will come up that way, the valve's on the top. And what happens then, you've got, excuse me, you've got a thing there called inlet port. Now, what this does on modern day engines, and even the later Triumph Heralds, you've got 2 inlet ports. So what they do, they service each valve. So you've got exhaust valve, inlet valve, exhaust valve. That's for 2 cylinders. So what happens on these old Triumphs, and it's very much like the old mini engines, you've got 1 inlet which then scavenges the 2 inlet valves. Okay. Now on most modern day cars, you've usually got direct access, so you've got an inlet per inlet valve, exhaust pipe, exhaust outlet per exhaust valve on these. So you've got, on this one you have got an exhaust valve per cylinder, but on the inlet you've got two inlets, and they service two inlets or 2 valves on each side. Easy, innit? So you've got the inlet from the carburettor in the inlet manifold, comes in to the, I'll show you, it's an easy way to show you it. So you've got air and fuel comes in from the carburettor at a metered rate. Remember what I said, 14.7 to 1. So it comes in metered. Okay, so I'm just looking at my dog and it's trying to chase my cat at the moment, so I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. But anyway, so you've got air and fuel, and don't forget, like I said to you before, 14.7 comes into the inlet manifold. It then services 2 valves. Okay, so you've got an inlet valve will then open, bringing in air and fuel into the cylinder, and when it's finished with the combustion and it exhaust opens up, brings out what's name. Okay, so it's easy. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to restore this, or when I say restore it, we're going to sort of bring it up to factory spec. It's very easy. What we do, first of all, we start off by taking all the valves out of it. Now, with these old Triumphs, you've got what I call is like a side valve collet. Okay, so you've got the collet seat is in the middle, but you also got a dissembling part there. So all you do is when the collet comes through on the spring like that, alright, it comes through the centre one. So all you need to do, because these springs are not the most powerfulest in the world, you can push these down by hand. I use either a spanner or a socket. Okay, you push it down and move it over so the valve goes into that seat there, it then pops straight off. Now modern day engines, like the Mini, I haven't got any around, no, modern day engine, or not modern day engines, but some engines, like the later Triumphs, the 1360s and things like that, they've got what they call split collets. So you don't have that opening that to deassemble it. What it is, you've got a single hole through the middle there, it's tapered, you then push the valve down with a spring compressor because the valves are quite tight, the valve springs are quite, what's the name, it then gives you room then to take what they call a split collet. It's a split collet system, and they're on a taper as well. So when the valve goes back down, the then taper then fits into the valve taper, or into the collet as we call it, fits in to the top bit here, and it sits and won't let it off. Okay, the only way you can get it off is to push the valve spring down, take the valve collets out, and the valve then will pop out. But these haven't got that. It makes it, for some unknown reason, it makes it an easier design, you know. But with high river engines, high compressor engines, you need those collets for extra safety, because there's always a risk of that popping off like that, and then you've got a valve dropping in the engine, damages the piston, new engine. If you're really lucky, it'll just stick in the top of the piston. But 9 times out of 10, I've seen valves drop, and 9 times out of 10, it completely ruins everything. Okay, valve spring and valve collet. What we're going to do is, I've taken the valves out, and as you can see, to be honest with you, they're not that bad. They're not that bad at all. This is quite an old engine, and I've measured all the valve stem, or not the valve stem, the actual valve itself, and I've actually measured the valve stem. So, and there's no rocking. The way I do it is, I put the valve in, and if you can get a bit of rock on it, new valve collets, or new valve guides, sorry, not collets, new valve guides. If there's no movement, like it is on this one, it's serviceable and it'll do again. It's basic engineering. I like all that sort of stuff, you know. And all we're going to do now is just really clean these valves up, so we can then get a grind on these, so we can then lap the valve seats into the valves, so we get a nice, lovely seal. What we don't want is, when that valve closes, is air and fuel to leak through there when it's on a compression stroke, because you'll lose compression. Also as well, it can backfire through the carburetor as well, which is not bad, which is not a good sign. So there you go, valve. We're going to give it a good clean up in a minute, and then jobs are good. Now then, how do we clean a valve up, I hear you ask? As you can see, this is quite carbon. It's not that bad actually. What you find is modern fuels are quite clean, so it will burn quite cleanly. Unlike the old fuels, the old leaded fuels, you used to have to do this virtually every sort of 15-20,000 miles, if that. I remember when I worked at British Leyland, used to do a full service, and used to do decarbon as well. So you used to take the cylinder head off at a big service, at like 24,000 miles. Take the cylinder head off and decarbon all these, because they used to carbon up quite badly, because you used to have the old mineral oil, you used to have lead as well. Now lead is a really good self-lubricating property as well, where unleaded isn't, unfortunately. It's not really got any lubricating properties at all. So what I tend to do with fuels in older cars, I tend to put a little drop of marine two-stroke in it as well. So you've got a little bit of two-stroke, and it just adds a little bit of oil to these valves and valve guides. Plus also as well, it just lowers the octane rating as well a little bit, so you don't have to deal the ignition too much. It doesn't ping too much. I personally have never had any problems with leaded heads. And you get this old wives' tale about, oh, you've got to have unleaded heads, you've got to have hardened seats in the valves and that. I've personally never had, and I've had loads of classic cars for years and years and years. And I remember all we used to do when unleaded fuel came out in the mid-80s, we used to, some of the Fords used to have what they call a valve assister. So you give you a bit of a bigger spark, and used to just retard the ignition by a couple of degrees. The difference between leaded and unleaded fuels is that leaded burns very, very regimental, but unleaded fuel burns all over the place. What I mean by regimental, so if you've got air and if you've got air and I can't remember the bloody word now. It's like a porn film, isn't it? If I've got air and fuel in the cylinder and it's being compressed, and then you set light to it, what happens with leaded fuel? It burns very, very gradual. When I say gradual, it's quick, but it burns very, very uniform. So it will start from one side and burn the other. Unleaded tends to burn all over the place. So you'll get a spark and then it'll burn. Right, that's why you get a lot of heat generated with unleaded fuel than you do with leaded fuel. Let me know your thoughts on that one. because I'm probably going to get shot down, but that's how I was always taught, and it works for me. So I've never ever used unleaded valves or unleaded valve seats. I've never had the reason to. I've never had an exhaust valve burn out of me. It's you usually find it's if you've got engines that are revving quite high, and it produces a lot of heat. The one that usually goes is the exhaust valve, because that's the one that's getting the most heat. Anyway, enough of that. So, cleaning valves. How do we clean valves? The best way to do it is old school. Get a drill, stick in a drill, job's good. Right? What I tend to do first of all is I tend to see that the carbon on that. I tend to scrape that carbon off first of all. So you get in with a trusty Stanley blade, or what we call in England a Stanley knife, made by a guy called Stanley. Right, so we get most of the, try and get most of the carbon off. Right, then all we do then, stick it in a drill, doesn't matter which way it goes, get yourself a little bit of abrasive paper, put the drill in a wash aim, and then just scrub that carbon off. Now what you've got to remember, what you've got to be careful at, is don't stick your carbon paper, or whatever it is you're using, abrasive paper, up that guide there. That's the actual bit that runs in the valve guide, and we don't really want to increase the measurement on that. Okay, so just look for the tap bit there, which is that bit there, and you'll find is that usually the bit that sticks out when it opens up. So it goes about as far as there and then closes, as far as there, closes. Right, so all we do, get a bit of carbon paper or any abrasive paper, sold in many good DIY shops, and just take as much as that carbon off as you can. Oh, that's where the drill's hitting the device. What you might have to do is periodically just take a little bit of the high spot of the carbon off. I know, listen, I know this is not a great way to do it, because there's a chance of scratching the valves, but listen, this is not a Formula 1 racing car, okay? This is what I call basic decarbonising. So you're getting most of the carbon off, like that. Not say up to the valve guide, we don't want to go any further. The job's good. And what I tend to do then is finish it off with a bit of wire wool. So you put a bit of wire wool on, and you just do that, see? And you've got not a bad cleaned exhaust valve. There's a little more work to be done on that, but it's, to be quite honest with you, it's not a pain at the back side. So there's your valves. Like I say, all we're doing now is just decarbonising, taking all the carbon off as much as we possibly can, because we want a nice clean valve. And as you can see, if I take it out of the vise, we got sort of like a cleanish valve. That would do. Like I say, it's not going to win awards, it's not going to win the Turner Prize for being the best looking valve in the world, but that will do for what I want to do. Okay, we then do the same with the inlet valve. Now what you find with inlet valves, they're nowhere near as carboned up as exhaust valves, because these run cool, so they don't get as near as hot as the exhaust valve. Now you find with the exhaust valve mainly in the inlet valves, mainly you get a lot of carbon built up in there, because the actual engine that's closed into its recess, and then that gets hot there. Now the other side, you'll find there's little bits of what they call wet. I call it wet carbon, not hard carbon. So all it is really, it's just unburnt fuel and unburnt fuel really. That's just congealed onto the actual valve bit, and that's it like that really. So you do virtually exactly the same as you would do an exhaust valve, but you don't need as much work. So what we're doing there is taking off most of the wet carbon, as I call it, or unburnt fuel that's been heated and it turns to carbon. Unlike the exhaust valve where it burns all the fuel out of it and it goes rock hard, so like that. So we just check, make sure there's no real amounts of carbon on that. Stick it in our trusty drill, and what you'll find 9 times out of 10 you won't need the hard abrasive on it, just you need a bit of wire wool if you can keep it in your hand. Like I say, being careful that we don't get it onto this valve seat, onto the valve itself, because that's a bit that runs in the guide. So it's nice, get most of the carbon off. Like that. So we've got a valve that doesn't look too bad. Look at that, eh? Isn't that nice? Now that will win a Turner Prize, because that's beautiful. That's just art in itself. Okay, now what we're going to do next, oh dear, I'm going to have a light fag, not light fag, sorry American folks. I'm going to light a cigarette, and then we'll clean all the cylinder head up. We'll get it painted so it makes it look nice. Then we'll start to put the valves back in, clean the combustion chambers up, and then I will show you how to lap valves in.